was speaking to him.
We're trying to set up an interview with Gravenor.
Good.
Definitely.
Exactly.
Sometime between now and the spring. Keep putting bars on there for a little while. How much do you like to put?
Usually I put 30 seconds.
Okay, great.
Have we said much about Len Peterson?
Not much, although I have a quote from him right here. I think I'll start with, and then you can just general quote, comment on the quote, and then comment on Len.
Okay.
Okay, good. That's what we'll start with. And I was just reading his name as you said that.
Yeah.
I'm ready.
Okay, super. On the Jupiter and the short-lived Jupiter Theatre and its demise, Len Peterson saw its downfall in political terms. He said, "We weren't establishment, we were considered radical and not quite safe. Sartre, Dalton Trumbo, Brecht, Lister Sinclair, Ted Allan." What do you think of that?
Well, that's true. I think it's not quite as political as that, but it was political enough. Toronto was, kind of, not exactly stuffy, but there's still a very strong establishment. The establishment is varied, but Canada, I think, is very establishment-minded. What you do is not say, let's not have an establishment. What you say is, we've got the wrong establishment. Let's change establishments. And so we now have a series of complicated, the Western establishment is now being represented by people like Preston Manning and Ralph Klein, and that's an establishment in itself. It's a son of social credit, of course, there's no question about that, and prairie populism and things. There's a feminist establishment, and that's very strong too. Political correctness is certainly part of the same. That's become an establishment. I'm against all establishments, and I always have been. I don't seem to be able to get the hang of them, and nor does Len Peterson. And I'd like to say a word or two about Len Peterson, because of all the playwrights that we've seen in Canada, I think Len is the best. I think Len was the best, the most resolute, the one with the most inner fire. He still has fire in his belly. He's just finished 2 long plays about Cervantes, and as usual he is trying to tell the truth. There's a distinction which Shostakovich used to make between artists who try to tell the truth, like Beethoven or Mussorgsky, and those who don't really bother. And Len has always tried to tell the truth, and he's light-hearted and humorous about it. He writes very grim plays. Burlap Bags is an extraordinary achievement. Very early on. They're All Afraid, an extraordinary achievement. He writes, as it were, from a European background. He's from Regina, and he has a lot of wonderful, funny things to say about Regina. Where you can look further and see less than anywhere else on earth. And if you want to go for a picnic, you go and sit in the shade of the barbed wire fence. Len's pitch on the prairies is interesting. You either look at something very close, right under your nose, and the next thing you see is the Andromeda Galaxy. And there's not much in between, and that's a frame of mind. Len's fortitude. He's not had, I think, a very easy life, artistically. He has received many awards and honors, and in my opinion, not nearly enough. He is still very much neglected, and I think it's very unfortunate. I think that if ever we have a national treasure, it's Len Peterson.
To go into a broad generality about your style of writing I have here is that you supposedly create 2 types of plays that have your unmistakable stamp. The first is the serious and ambitious verse drama on a universal theme, such as Socrates. And the other they're mentioning is the witty and ironic satire fantasy, as in All About Emily. Is this because these are the ones that sell and you write everything in between, or is it because this is all you really produce?
No, that's what I want to do. The way I think to have a reasonably happy, creative life is to do what you want to do and then try and sell it. That's the trick, you know. At the same time, there are various things you do because you've been asked to or commissioned to do, and things like that. School broadcasts are one thing. A play that I did, for example, for television, a long play, 1 hour and a half or some such length, about Emily Murphy. I wasn't especially interested in Emily Murphy, but I was commissioned by Sidney Newman to do this thing. Emily Murphy is the lady who succeeded in having women defined as persons by the Privy Council, as it then was. The ultimate court of appeal was the Privy Council in London. And I thought it was a very ambivalent story. It made an interesting story because, as far as I could see, it's not nice that women should not be described as persons. But the only real handicap was that they could not be appointed to the Senate, which specifically mentioned persons. And I think that old Emily wanted to be appointed to the Senate. And so she wanted to get the persons out of the way. I mean, we would now feel, and I would certainly feel, that it was an outrage, you know, not to do it anyway. But I think that was what was behind it. But, you know, she was very crafty and, you know, very good as a politician. She was, unfortunately, I think, from her point of view, up against an even craftier politician, William Lyon Mackenzie King. And nobody ever blindsided Mackenzie King. And you know, it was finally passed by Emily Murphy's pressure and all the rest of it. And Mackenzie King was very pleased and very gratified and all these various things. I suppose he had the approval of his mother and his dog and all those things. And he could now appoint a woman to the Senate, and he did. But it wasn't Emily Murphy.
What was taboo in the early days in Canada? Could you have lampooned Mackenzie King? Would you have?
Somewhat. You had to be a little careful about it. Nowadays, I tell you what you couldn't lampoon, and I must say that's interesting. You should mention that. For many years, I was on 26 years, I think it was, a huge length of time, on a program called Court of Opinion. Kate Aitken was on that show regularly, all the time. And the two of us sat side by side. We disagreed on everything, but we had a lot of affection for each other, finally. But one day there was a tremendous fuss. The fuss consisted of this. We were asked in turn who we thought was what woman we admired most in the world. And why, of course. And then we commented on each other's choices. I've forgotten who was it Eleanor Roosevelt or Indira Gandhi or something like this, I don't know. However, Kate Aitken said the Queen. She was very fond of the Queen, and she used to drop wonderful lines, wonderful one-liners. Like the last time I had tea at Buckingham Palace, I gave the Queen the recipe for turning out biscuits because their cookies there are really awful. And every time I've been there, the cookies, you know, you sort of got that kind of thing, you know. So anyway, I said, which I thought was innocuous enough, that I thought the Queen was a very conscientious, very conscientious, diligent woman, but that if her name had been Miss Smith, I doubt if she'd have been ever heard from much. The switchboard lit up, letters came pouring in, and the Secretary of State, Lester Pearson, raised a fuss behind the scenes, saying life is hard enough as it is, you know, without this sort of vague, unprincipled attack on royalty. I was lucky to survive, you know. It's changed.
Different times.
Different times, yeah.
I've got a little anecdote here. The night before the opening of Death of a Nation, author Ted Allan gave a revised script to the Jupiter, and they had it down pat in a day. 24 hours they took to take with a revised script. Did you have any experiences like that? Last minute changes, incredible.
Not on stage plays, but I do remember an extraordinary incident when George VI died. It was felt that there should be a special documentary, and nobody bothered to commission one, so they asked me to do a documentary on George VI, which was to be 2 hours, and there was something like 2 days to do it in. So, I'd concocted this documentary, and I remember running out of steam and not being able, in the last hour or two, some cuts were needed. I absolutely couldn't make the cuts. And short, simple cuts. Lorne Green was doing it, and Lorne said, "Look, let me do the cut." And there it is. And what you do is, we did what we used to call the Andrew Allan cuts, which was to cut pages 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and add "but." And of course, most scripts turn out like that. But this was, it was an effort to this last-minute thing. Everyone worked wonderfully, except, I'm afraid, Ernie Bushnell, who was the guy who put in the code. He was upset because there was a quotation from Shakespeare in there about the king being a man. It's Richard II, I think. When all the kingship is taken away, it's a man that you're dealing with. And Ernie thought that was lèse-majesté or something of that kind.
Barrymore said all of Canada's National Theatre could have fit in a rather small bus.
Yes.
Neighbour Moore, however, says Canadian radio was Canada's National Theatre.
It was.
Was it somewhere in the middle there? Or?
Well, there was a time when Canadian radio was the National Theatre. Yeah, that's no question about that, because, we've already discussed the Dominion Drama Festival stuff, What makes a professional is getting paid for it. It's not ability, unfortunately. It's the whole string of things it's not. When they say so-and-so's attitude is very unprofessional, usually meaning they're having a screaming tantrum or something. Professionals, I've noticed, often have screaming tantrums. Unprofessional behavior seems quite common among professionals. But the essence of being a professional, and it's really no joke, is to get paid for the job. That means you can earn your living at it. That means you can devote your life to it. And that's very different from working as an amateur. No matter how good, you have to put your life on the line. And all artists have to do this. All creative people literally have to bet their lives on their talent. And if you make that decision, it's a very, very big decision. It's going to affect everything that you do. And that's the essence of being professional, is to get some kind of a little bit of fever so you can get on to the next one.
I've already asked you about John Draney. Of course we've done. The World of the Wonderful Dark, Vancouver in '59. Barrymore's talked quite a bit about it. His Indian, was that the Indian one? It sounded, what devil was that? So we'll just finish this tape and
Yep.
I'll get you back.
Ready?
All right. Just about.
Okay, I'm rolling.
Thank you. Yes, Barrymore's told me about The World of the Wonderful Dark and the effects and the color of his skin and bursting a blood packet and Vancouver. And that was an interesting project about...
It was, yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Yes, it was commissioned by Nicky Goldschmidt for the first Vancouver Festival. And it was a play about the West Coast Indians. It was really based on two groups, mainly the Tlingit, and it was about a rivalry within the clans and a potlatch and things of this kind. I made it as authentic as possible. I'd previously done an anthropology series with the Ford Foundation, The Ways of Mankind, and I'd become fascinated with the groups there. They treated us, Barry Morse was the head bad guy, Bill Needles was the head good guy, John Draney was one of the main characters in there and was very impressive in that. There were dances, and they did the traditional dances correctly. The winter ceremonies of the West Coast Indians were really quite extraordinary. They went in for conjuring tricks, and there were secret societies, so all the members of the society knew what was going on, and the people outside didn't. And the people in the society would do all the various little things that they were supposed to do. We can do two things about that. One is wait, and the other is mention it.
Oh yes, I see. The racket, that's true. If it happens again, or wait. No, we just waited, it looks like. It looks like it's still going on. Yeah, thanks for you guys mentioning it. Then there's the buses and all that stuff going by. That doesn't help.
Yeah.
We were mic'd up in such a way. Does the background sound come through very much?
No, just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
You could hear it, but
Yeah.
not so much.
Well, I'm sure we can hear this stuff, but that's all right.
It's quite resonant.
Okay, we can go on.
Yeah, I guess so.
As soon as we start talking about the winter ceremonies, you notice the building starts joining in, and we're getting bangs and cracks and thuds and bumps, and the Northwest Indians had wonderful houses, beautifully made, and of course they were the totem pole carvers, and it was a very rich and extraordinary life that they lived. The Aboriginals around Vancouver were very suspicious, and wondered if we were going to send them up in some way, and we were not at all. And finally, some of the dancers were Aboriginals, and they sent for Grandma would show up, and Grandma would turn out, in fact, was a member of the Kwakiutl Cannibal Society, all these sort of things. And Grandma was a very kindly old lady, one of them particularly. And the dances, we got it all out of the famous books of how it was done and what they're supposed to do. They were described as the women dancing with their elbows bent at right angles and the palms of their hands upright, swaying from side to side and walking backwards in front of the cannibal novice, so to speak. And, so we were doing that. And the granddaughter finally said, they're really trying to do it seriously. I think you should drop by and give them a hand, So she dropped by and looked at all this and said, "That's very nice. Yes, you are trying to do it seriously, aren't you?" Yeah. She said, "Unfortunately, you don't have any idea what's going on, do you?" He said, "No." And she said, "You've got it out." They know the books, incidentally. "You've got it out of Franz Boas's book, haven't you?" "Yes." So she said, "What's happening? I'll just tell you." And then it's very easy. What's happening is that those girls are supposed to be holding a corpse in their hands, which they're offering to the cannibal and persuading him to come. Well, the moment you hear that, instantly, sure enough, it's elbows at right angle, but, right away, suddenly the thing is being acted, it's being performed, And there's this wonderful sense. It was an audience participation effort. It was done in the Georgia Auditorium in Vancouver, which had no air conditioning. And so you got a combination of the World of the Wonderful Dark, which was the totem thing, and the Black Hole of Calcutta. You got the two going at once. Everyone suffocated in the place. But that was all right for the performers, most of whom were only wearing loincloths. And Barry, of course, had spectacular effects when he was finally stabbed. He was covered all over with what's called in the trade cackle bladders. Cackle bladder with chicken's blood in it, or paint or something of that kind. Barry used to use two. He had one in his hand that he'd palmed and one in his mouth. And so when finally they stabbed him, he would clutch, there's his bare chest. And suddenly blood starts running out, What happened? How wonderful. And he had 2 or 3 more speeches to make, and then blood would pour out of his mouth and he fell on the stage. Yikes, It was all good stuff. It is good, you see, in the Shakespearean tradition of do it in front of them. Or in the famous old vaudeville tradition, which I believe in very much indeed. And that's advice to performers, advice to writers. If you can't make them laugh, frighten them. In other words, do something to them. Don't just stand around on the stage. The whole point about the theatre is to reach the audience and enlighten them through their emotions, to make them think about their emotions and develop feelings about their thoughts. If you can do that, that's what I've been trying to do all along. When it's, my successes such as they are have been when that has worked, and not when something else has worked.
Like midwifery sort of thing.
Sort of, yeah.
SCW.
Essa. Essa Young.
Succeeded Andrew Allan.
Essa
Can you tell me
Young.
a little bit about him?
Yep. It's just pronounced Young.
Yeah.
Yeah. Essa Young is a most remarkable man. He was Swedish. Was he ever Swedish? Yes, he was a wild Swede from time to time. His style of production was completely different. He was as good a producer as Andrew, but totally different. He specialized in European plays. A lot of adaptations that I did were done by Essa, or produced by Essa. The Wild Duck, for example, by Ibsen, was done by Essa. Essa used to act out all the lines of all the characters all the time. When you were on the mic, and there was a glass window so you could see the producer, which is not the case in all broadcasters, you could see Essa, in fact, saying the lines along with you and playing the part along with you. That was the way he liked to do it, and you soon got used to it. Andrew never did that. Andrew had a very stern, detached sort of manner with an air of great precision. One of the things that Andrew did wonderfully was he gave cues which were very exact and very helpful. Cue is, time to talk. And yet this a great deal to it. One of our famous producers who was, I'm afraid, very drunk in the booth very often, would get carried away and would give cues like this. I remember him once giving a cue like, and that was kind of hard to manage. But Andrew's cues, he would always put up his hand. He always made sure not that he moved that way, which you can't see. He would move this way, which you can see. And it was possible, if it's a sharp cue, he would possible to say, there's the cue. Or he would do. So, there's a whole repertory of body language and cues and things of this kind. Quite extraordinary.
A conductor, right?
Yep.
The players of the musical instruments.
And remembering everything is going live, and Andrew took many timings, he was timing about every 15 seconds in different colored inks, and cutting and changing so that he knew there was never any grand hurry up at the end. It was never allowed to get more than 5 seconds out. He was watching the timings all the way through, so he would sometimes speed up a little bit,
Like walking on eggshells.
Yes, absolutely.
That's it for all the questions I've written down. I wonder if there's any glaring errors or things you would personally like to...
I don't think so. I think we've already gone on about everything,
We've only brought up to a certain year, of course, and didn't really touch on the 70s and 80s and later stuff. So that's basically what we were interested in.
Okay.
Super. So I think
Thank you.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it very much. You made it very painless.